Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. We are supposed to discuss the topic Beyond Finance, how savings groups help empower communities. One of the key subjects of interest to WCF and company members is empowered communities, which has been one of the 3 pillars of the pathways to sustainable cocoa strategy. WCF's vision of an empowered community is a community which is able to own and lead its own development. Empowered community is established on developed grassroots capacities that will help such a community to build an environment where human rights are respected and protected for all, especially for women and children. Opportunities are equally accessible to every individual, and input of every individual, irrespective of gender and age, is taken and assessed in the conduct of household and community affairs. Resilient community members can be built through financial inclusion, which is a key factor in reducing poverty. However, women are among the group of people that are financially excluded due to demand and supply barriers, as well as legal and regulatory restrictions associated with financial inclusion. Savings groups, particularly Village Savings and Loans Association, VSLAs, have become a successful tool in cocoa and chocolate companies' sustainability programs. A VSLA is a group of has a group of membership of about 15 to 25 people who pool their resources together in a form of savings, and members can take small loans from the group savings. The activities of the VSLA run in cycles of about 1 year, after which the accumulated savings and the loan interest are shared out among the members in proportion to individual contributions. We have gathered here to discuss the role the VSLAs can play as one of the critical keys to open the doors to access savings, loans, and eventually enter the formal financial sector. We will discuss also how the VSLA can help the members build resilience to cope with shocks, reduce child labor, and build social capital. We also consider some of the efforts being made in advocating VSLA recognition, explore avenues for avenues to factor VSLAs in government financial inclusion strategies, and thereby gets opportunity to amplify the impact of VSLAs, as well as attracting social protection support from government. We are very privileged today to have 5 experts who will share their perspective from industry side, industry company side, CSO and NGOs and governments. And the way we'll go about it, I will introduce the speakers just before they do their presentations. And after the presentations, I will ask them the first question, after which the floor will be opened for everybody here to ask questions or share opinion. You are encouraged to use the chat box to present your questions and your opinions or suggestions. You are all welcome, and we are glad to have you here. I will first start with Dr. Thomas De Hoop. Dr. De Hoop directs a research and evaluation portfolio with a focus on the impact, scalability, and cost-effectiveness of self-help groups, savings groups, and education innovations in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. He is the program area lead for gender and social protection in American Institute for Research's International Development Division. Further, he is currently the co-principal investigator for the Evidence Consortium on Women's Groups, a 4-year research project that focuses on sensitizing, strengthening, and disseminating research on the impact and effectiveness of large-scale government-supported women's groups. So welcome, Thomas, and thanks for joining us. I have a very simple question to kickstart your presentation. My question is, how did savings groups help people to cope with the shock of COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you very much, and the floor is for you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for inviting me also. It's very exciting to be here for this presentation. I'm going to present some work that we did as part of the Evidence Consortium on Women's Groups. So the Evidence Consortium on Women's Groups is a global research consortium that is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We worked on with a large number of stakeholders. We all brought a lot of evidence together in the aftermath of COVID-19 up until April 2021, I should say. And we brought research together from international NGOs, from researchers, and you can see all the organizations here that contributed to this. And we examined basically, indeed, exactly the question that Rita Seth spoke about, like how are savings groups affected by COVID-19, but also how did savings group membership mitigate some of the negative economic consequences of COVID-19? We did this with a large number of stakeholders, including like various research organizations, Makerere University, as well as the Campbell Collaboration, American Institutes for Research, the Population Council, but also with a large number of NGOs. I will not mention all of them here, but BRAC, CARE, SEEP were all involved in this effort. So before we started, what we basically did is we examined, we all know that village savings and loan associations and savings groups and other types of women's groups can provide certain benefits, but the way they provide those benefits change over the course of the pandemic. And one way in which they can provide benefits is because they're often used as a vehicle for providing social protection and support. It could be cash transfers, it could be food transfers, it could be vouchers, which could mitigate some of the consequences of the lockdown in the early stages of the pandemic. At the same time, like one of the features of groups is exactly that they're groups. So they need to meet in order, but this becomes, of course, a lot more challenging in the wake of the pandemic with social distancing. Like over the course of the pandemic, groups have been like changing their functioning, and maybe they've introduced digital meetings, but also like the key is that it becomes more challenging to actually meet as a group. And in addition to that, they also partner with governments and civil society in some of the health responses. Like a lot of groups have actually been involved in providing dissemination about COVID-19, like the signs of COVID-19, as well as how to prevent it to their members. So what did we do? A lot of NGOs, as well as researchers, have actually conducted some research. Like our job was really to bring all of this research together and to come with overarching lessons. In this case, with a specific focus on sub-Saharan Africa. We have another brief also on India that is in progress. But considering our priority countries, we primarily focused on Nigeria and Uganda, but we also brought in evidence from a wide range of other sources. We started with like an evidence synthesis of women's groups and past shocks, and we brought all kinds of different research together. Like this ranged from research from NGOs, such as CARE, who examined like how the savings groups functioning changed after COVID-19, as well as like more phone-based surveys conducted by the World Bank and analysis of those kinds of phone-based surveys. I'm going to give like some illustrative examples of what we found. And these are all like general findings, but I'm going to go into more specifics for each of these findings. And basically what we found is like, as you can see, like after COVID-19, because of social distancing concerns, groups faced quite a few challenges because of the depletion of funds. They had to help like the most vulnerable members, but that also resulted in them having fewer funds themselves. But existing savings, as well as access to loans after COVID-19, did actually help, especially in Nigeria. We could assess this quite rigorously to actually mitigate some of the negative economic consequences of COVID-19. What we very clearly found is like we combined living standards measurement survey data, which are like nationally representative data from Nigeria, with follow-up phone-based survey from Nigeria. And what we found is that even if savings group members were affected and they experienced more food insecurity after the pandemic, they were less affected than households that did not have savings group members. And you can see like it ranges from 6.7 percentage points to 4.2 percentage points, depending on like what kind of survey question was actually asked. But it was quite clear that savings group membership could actually positively affect like the likelihood of food security. So they were less affected by the lockdowns and the pandemic. In addition, like after a gradual relaxation of the lockdown, and this is something we found across sub-Saharan Africa, but like these are just a few examples. Groups started meeting more frequently again after gradual relaxation of the lockdown, like in Nigeria, but groups also changed their functioning. There were many digital meetings. Groups often had smaller meetings. There was mask use, and like groups basically started changing their functioning after the pandemic. I must say here, like there was a lot of variation after the Delta variant. This was not really captured in our brief because when we actually finalized our brief, that's exactly when the Delta variant actually started emerging. And some of these findings therefore do not apply, for example, to some of the crises in Uganda, which had quite some devastating consequences after the Delta variant emerged in sub-Saharan Africa. What we also saw is that women really played a leadership role in response to the pandemic. Members of savings groups, they contributed to and led responses to COVID-19. For example, they contributed to community level decision-making, but also to the production of personal protective equipment, such as face masks. And in some cases, like women's group members actually lost their income in first instance, but some of the additional activities actually enabled them to earn additional income through their responses to COVID-19. But what we really clearly saw is that women clearly played like a leadership role. And this was in quite a few contexts. You see here some examples from Benin, Mali, and Niger, which was focused on care, for example, as well as from Women for Women International in Nigeria, as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo and Mali. So overall, what we see is really like that women's groups found ways to respond to COVID-19, but there was also quite some variation across contexts. So for example, in a Vision Fund program in Uganda, 80% of groups in refugee settings continue to meet in small groups, but among host communities, like in non-refugee settings, like we found that a much smaller percentage of groups actually continued meeting. Also, groups generally like adhere to government procedures when they like gradually started like meeting again. What are some of the policy implications of all of this? And I think we need to here distinguish between like short-term and long-term policy consequences. I also think we need to update some of these policy recommendations based on new research. We're planning to also examine some of the longer-term consequences of COVID-19. Like what we really clearly see in the short term, like is like savings group members face sharp reductions in income with cash transfers, which can be like mitigated by additional cash transfers, food transfers. Like savings group members often like live close to the poverty line. Sometimes they're slightly above it, sometimes they're slightly below it. They're maybe not among the poorest of the poor, but they face a risk of like falling below the poverty line. Importantly, like also partnering with and supporting governments by investing in national and also like social protection systems and in national tracking systems of women's groups. And like in the long term, like have some like longer term consequences. What we really think what will be important is like not only providing these short term like cash transfers and food transfers to savings group members, but having a more longer term strategy where social protection systems actually explicitly integrate savings groups into social protection systems, like basically to reduce risk. And I realized so far I've not actually looked at like some of the groups that are particularly relevant for this conference, such as cocoa farmers, as well as like coffee farmers. And like particularly for these kinds of groups who face lots of price risks, maybe this does not only apply to COVID-19, but also to some of the other like major risks that they're facing, like when prices drop, for example. Also, what we really see is like prioritizing women's leadership in the community response to COVID-19 was quite successful. So I'm going to keep that slide on. I don't know, Rita, whether you want me to keep the slide on or whether you want me to stop sharing my screen, but this was my presentation. Thank you all so much. Really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Dr. DeHope, for this insightful presentation of how the VSLA was used to mitigate COVID-19 negative impact of COVID-19 on the group members. Thank you very much. My question really relates to your suggestion of relinking these groups to social protection interventions. You have rightly advocated this link, but you know that social protection in most developing countries targets extremely poor people and may exclude these people, even though you mentioned that some of them live below poverty line because of limited resources. Governments of developing countries normally target extremely poor people. And so in your opinion, what should be done to ensure that saving groups are also targeted for social protection interventions? Any views? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rita. That's a great question, actually. I think when we mention that savings groups can help mitigate some of the negative economic consequences of COVID-19, I think one thing to keep in mind is that like we in no way argue that savings groups are like a silver bullet for like poverty reduction and responses to COVID-19. And I think savings groups like are the right vehicle possibly for some populations, but not maybe for all populations. One of the challenges of savings groups, as you rightly point out, is that like they're not always targeting the poorest of the poor in communities, right? Like, and like just by their design, there's savings obligations if you want, and that's not always feasible for the poorest of the poor. So I think we need to basically distinguish between different policy instruments for different target groups. When we think about some of the poorest of the poor, like maybe savings groups are not the right vehicle to help them after COVID-19. When we think about savings group members, though, like many of them do not live far below the poverty line. Many of them are basically like, and I've heard this term before, like they're labeled as the missing middle often, where cash transfers are often targeted towards like some of the poorest of the poor. And the graduation approach, for example, is also targeted towards the poorest of the poor, where people receive asset transfers. But for savings group members, like especially when crisis hits, they do face the risk of actually like falling from that position where they're currently in, like close to the poverty line to far below the poverty line. And instruments such as cash transfers and other national protection systems can actually help them like stay like where they currently are in the wake of crisis. So it's basically like a risk insurance mechanism, you could say, to make sure that they're not actually needing, like that they're not falling far below the poverty line. In addition to that, I also think that savings groups, when we think about cash transfers, one way to think about it is as them as recipients of cash transfers. The other way to think about it is as a vehicle for distributing cash transfers. Like even if the poorest of the poor are not necessarily members of savings groups, like savings groups can often be cost effectively used for other ways to distribute cash transfers, for example. All of this to say, like, I'm in no way like arguing that savings groups like are the silver bullet for all of this, but it's like one of quite a few policy instruments that can be helpful in these kinds of instances.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation and sharing. Yes, you are right. We need to also really push for those people who they call the missing links. Normally they target extremely poor people for social protection, who are at the bottom, and then those up there who are in formal employment. And most of the people are left unattended to. And I think that going forward, we have to find a way of pushing for these people to also be included in social protection. Thank you very much. Yes, we move on with our second presentation, which is going to be given by Like Guinea. Like is a program manager for community development at Beyond Beans, a foundation that develops and implements sustainability programs for commodities trading company UTG. Like has been working on sustainability related topics in the cocoa and coffee sectors for more than 6 years, mainly focusing on West Africa. Before joining Beyond Beans in 2019, she worked as a consultant at AgriLogic. She is a Dutch national and holds a master's degree in environmental biology from Utrecht University. And Like is going to try to answer the question, how have VSLAs helped deal with child labor issues? Like, you are welcome to the program. Thanks for joining, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rita, for that very nice introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's listening. First, a quick introduction about ETG and Beyond Beans, because I think not everyone may be familiar with us yet. ETG is a company that operates globally in multiple industries, including commodity trading and processing, as well as agricultural inputs and logistics. And ETG has established Beyond Beans as a foundation to implement its sustainability programs on behalf of ETG for its clients, mainly in cocoa, but also in coffee and cashew in the countries that you can see on this map. ETG and Beyond Beans are a big fan of savings groups, specifically VSLAs. They are a central part of our community development work. Some of the reasons you have already heard from Thomas, they have helped in COVID, in the time of the COVID pandemic. More generally, some examples of benefits are that they require very limited initial investments, and once they are set up, they are independent of outside support, and in most cases keep functioning long-term without that external support. We also see that they replicate easily. The spin-off groups are formed after seeing the success of the first group. So as ETG and Beyond Beans, we have so far supported the setup of around 130 groups in Ghana. We have another 80 planned for the coming crop year. In Côte d'Ivoire, we are now at 25, but we have 60 planned to be set up. And in Cameroon, we also have 11. So in addition to the benefits I already mentioned, we have also noticed that VSLAs are a very good platform on which to build additional activities and intervention. And why is that? These groups are based on trust. They deal with money, so trust is really essential for these groups to function well. So members themselves decide who can become a member. And this also makes it a really good place to discuss sensitive topics, such as household relations, gender equality, and also child labor. And we also see usually a very high representation of women. In some cases, the groups are women only. We also have mixed groups where usually at least half of the participants are female. And we also see that not all members are cocoa farmers. So in that way, they are a really good representation of the community as a whole, especially compared to the standard cocoa supply chain interventions, which often target cocoa farmers and specifically farm owners that are part of the supply chain, that are often members of cooperatives, and thereby already have access to certain services like training. One example of an intervention that we have built on the basis of VSLAs is a method we call VSLA Child. We have developed with the Ghanaian NGO PDA. This method has three main components. The first of which is the VSLA itself, of course, which already brings many benefits. Secondly, we have added the GALS methodology to this, which is an existing proven method, which is basically a set of participatory and visual tools or exercises focused on financial planning and promotion of gender equality and shared decision-making. And this component brings the benefit of women empowerment, and through that also the likelihood is increased that more household investments are made in child well-being, for example, through education and nutrition. And thirdly, we've added the child component, which includes a specific sensitization on child labor, as well as promoting members to initiate remediation activities in their own households or as a group. And this hopefully leads to improved awareness of what child labor is and why it's harmful, as well as overall improved child well-being. And so this combination of three components we have abbreviated to VSLA Child to make it easier to pronounce and remember. Now, this is the theory. And as my last slide, I wanted to dive a little bit into what this actually looks like in practice. The project has been running for about 1.5 years now. We have not yet measured the impacts, actual impacts of the project. That will be done next year. So we don't know yet if it's actually successful at reducing child labor, for example. However, what I can tell you about is what we see now in the field in practice happening within the first wave of groups that were set up that are now finalizing their GALS and child exercises. So first of all, the sensitization of child labor has been fully integrated into the GALS and child exercises in the weekly meetings and even within the GALS exercises. So the groups are encouraged to discuss these topics with each other. Topics include what are human rights, what are child rights, what is child labor, why is it harmful, but also what is light work, what is allowed to be done by children. And secondly, child well-being has been integrated in the exercises that are focused on planning for the future. That includes two main ones, the multi-lane highway and the household development plan. So for the multi-lane highway, this is an exercise where participants set goals for the future and compare those to the current situation, and then define steps to reach those goals, as well as opportunities and challenges. And child well-being is included in this exercise by asking participants to include any child labor cases found in their own households and how they propose to remediate those. Based on a multi-lane highway, each participant is then supposed to create a household development plan, which is sort of a more action-oriented version of that exercise. And related to child well-being, we see in practice that participants often include the education of their children as a goal in these plans, but they also prioritize healthcare and, for example, minimize or adjust household chores done by children, or they set as a goal to save so they can hire adult labor to free the children from the farm work. So finally, the VSLA groups are also encouraged to undertake group or community level actions that improve child well-being. So this could be, for example, spending the social fund on something that improves child well-being, such as school supplies. And that was a very brief introduction into our VSLA child methods. I'd be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A session, or contact me in case you'd like to know more.
Thank you very much, Leke, for this presentation. I have a very simple question for you, and it is like, what are the cultural challenges that impede on this agenda of using the VSLA to reduce child labor?
That is a great question. I'm thinking of two things. First of all, basically expanding VSLAs to new communities is the first step, of course, if you want to use them to combat child labor. And we do encounter in some communities that they are a bit reluctant to join a VSLA because they have bad past experiences with fraudulent savings groups. So there are a lot of different forms of saving groups. They have different names in different countries. And in Ghana, for example, we've seen that there is someone who comes into the community and tells everyone, just give me my money and then I'll make money for you or something. And they lose all their money. And so when we come into that community with a similar idea, they don't trust us, which is very understandable. So that is something you have to work through. Second thing I'm thinking is we still struggle, even though this method doesn't require you to be able to read or write. You don't even need to know numbers for the GALS exercises. Literacy is still an issue, especially I think with middle-aged and older women, because they just have a fear of using a pen and paper. So the GALS exercises are all about drawing and symbols, but because they cannot read or write, they have the shame of using a pen and paper, which makes them reluctant to do the exercises. So that's another challenge.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And I like the way you said that the groups are sometimes missed with farmers and other members of the community joining the groups. So it is a great, it can be a great tool of reaching out to the community, other community members on these social issues. Thank you very much, Leke. Our third speaker is Aisha Rahamatali. I hope I've pronounced it well. Aisha is currently the Senior Advisor, Women Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition at CARE International, and supporting CARE participation in the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights Advocacy Coordinator in West Africa, supporting the implementation of the West Africa Impact Growth Strategy, Women on the Move, an initiative that aims at scaling up the savings groups model in West Africa through partnerships and advocacy for government. So Aisha is going to handle the question, what has been done so far to advocate for VSLA recognition and efforts being developed so far for better recognition. Aisha, over to you. We are all ears. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Rita. Let me just put the slide. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me to speak to this event. So, as we've heard from both Thomas and Leke, savings groups or VSLAs, I think we use the terms interchangeably, but we're talking about the same groups, have had a real impact in the communities where they are. And CARE has been working with them for more than 25, 30 years, and we're really seeing that impact in the communities. And we think that it's a model that really can be scalable. And we believe that it's a sustainable, cost-effective, viral, high-impact, and targeted model. We see it as a platform not only to advance women's economic empowerment, as Leke mentioned, the majority of group members are women, but also as a platform to help the communities, the women and the families to advance outcomes that are related to social, economic, and political outcomes. And I think that the COVID pandemic has showed us the power of those groups. I won't repeat what Thomas had said. I'll just add a point that we saw happening in countries like Mali, for example, where in addition to changing their ways of working, the women actually became leaders when it came to supporting the communities, meaning that they will create solidarity with the poorest of the poorest, or actually in some instances, they were able to support the governments at local level to identify the most needy and helping them distribute immediate needs, support in the communities. So with that in mind, the model has already started to be replicated. So it was established in 91, sorry. And to date, we have 23 million members globally created by NGOs. We heard the example from Like and how the model is really being replicated by others. And also local actors and CSOs have now been adopting the model. I think it's important to note that when the model is replicated by these CSOs and NGOs, it's not, they have several goals. First goal is really to ensure that women have access to informal financial inclusion and that they're able to manage their everyday life. But as Like mentioned, and we saw that some others also use it as an entry point to other interventions and services, such as GBV or child labor or health, etc. The model has also been adopted in the agribusiness sector. In the cacao sector, coffee, sugar, tea, rice, etc. And it really represents a broadly applicable interventions to advance commercial objectives and unlock the farmers' access to resources and information and build the capacity in the form of increased savings and access to both formal and informal insurance. So we believe that corporate investment in savings groups will and is already improving the sustainability of the supply chains. I guess without any surprise, the replication by financial institution is one that we've noticed more for those who are active in the sector, mostly to advance financial inclusion of the most needy, often in rural areas and women, as we mentioned earlier. And by engaging with those financial institutions, whether they are banks, microfinance institutions, or mobile networks, we see that they adapt their products to the needs of the groups and their members. And it allows really for them, for the groups to have easier access and for the institutions themselves to have access to remote communities. We have seen also an increase on the use of digital. I think we also saw that in the example that Thomas gave, and also increases the efficiency and safety of savings groups operations. We know that the way the model is built, they normally keep the money in the box, but having it in a safe space has been also one of the key reasons these groups have been linked to financial institutions. And lastly, I think it also brings a new customer base to those financial institutions, a new market that they haven't tapped in. I think that the focus of my presentation will be with the replications by government. We believe that governments are really the most promising path for creating savings groups at scale. They can be a vehicle for them to advance the SDGs and other governments' priorities, in particular around economic growth, financial inclusion, social protection, resilience, gender equality, health, I would say even political participation, etc. But in order for the government to be able to do that, they need to respond to women's needs and really generate evidence to inform the different policies and programs in place. And we also have to ensure that when we are engaging with the governments, we don't remain at the national level. Yes, the policies need to be there, but then how are they going to be implemented? How do they turn into action? So by ensuring that the VSLAs or savings groups model is embedded in the design and financing activities of the governments will really help to ensure that savings groups have access to different government services, such as national funds, etc. So how we've done that? We've been engaging in this work for between 10 and 6 years, I would say. And I think that the first thing to do is to build the evidence from the experience that we're seeing. We've organized field visits with decision makers. Of course, research have been really helpful as a way to prove that this was possible. And I think that to do this work, partnership is central. And at country level, we created or revived some of the groups, platforms of savings groups implementers to actually go to the governments together and advocate together. And we've also built partnership with actors who had more influencing power than we do. Like, for example, the African Development Bank, who would go directly to speak to the governments, or the Alliance of Financial Inclusion, which is a network of central banks and ministries of finance. One thing that has also worked is to create space where governments can can learn together about the adoption of the savings groups model. One that we've done actually 2 years ago was by the SIP network, where we had a peer learning group of governments around integration of the savings groups model in graduation programs. So what are we seeing as results? To date, we have 74 government initiatives and across 20 countries and by different government institutions, ministries of finance, health, social protection, and others. So I've put here a few examples. I think it was Thomas who mentioned that it would be good to have a space where we can see what's happening, having a map of those governments, of those VSLAs that exist across the board in a country. The government of Rwanda has done that, and this mapping has been online for 2 years now, or 3. And every actor who's engaging with VSLA in the country, whether they are national government or CSOs or NGOs, just ensure that this information is put in that platform and in which region they are and what they have been able to mobilize. So it's been a really interesting experience. Niger has also included savings groups in their national women's economic empowerment strategy. And also linked to the question around social protection that you asked earlier, we're really seeing good examples of governments like in Ethiopia here, who have included it in their national productive safety net programs, with actually the aim to use the cash transfer to and allow services for 1 million of food insecure people annually. We have learned a lot of lessons. I won't go through all of them, but one of them is that government institutions are all working their way. They are not communicating with each other, and they're sometimes doubling. So it's important that we learn how to bring them together. The lack of funding or how to attract funding about this scale up has also been a challenge. And the need to build the staff capacity is really important. So as the way forward, we recently started actually last year with the government of Uganda. CARE is accompanying with the government of Uganda to work on a holistic approach to integrating the savings groups for women's empowerment. And while we work on the regulation, the creating and the enabling environment, the government institutions are really building the government's programs where they are creating and putting VSLAs in place for an end, whether it's for social protection, whether it's for youth engagement or gender programs. And in order to do that, the government had to enhance coordination among actors and approaches and really strengthen, for example, the monitoring and evaluation and the research and documenting, etc. So I think that's what we've been able to do. And as a way of conclusion, I would just say that we see the results, they are there, but in order for them to be scalable and to have much more impact, we need a holistic approach from governments. And we also have to remember that system change takes time to take roots and that we need resources, investment, and partnership to make it happen. And this is the thing that we're trying to push more as we engage with governments. I'm just going to share with you that we've initiated a policy and program analysis where we are looking at those countries who have adopted the model in the last 5 years, where things are at this stage. And I think that there would be a space here for the private sector to play a role. So I'll stop there. I think I went beyond my time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Aisha has a lot of information to share with us, but unfortunately the time is not on our side. Thank you very much, Aisha, for that insightful presentation. My question for you is that you have indicated that governments are the most promising path to creating savings groups at scale, creating savings groups at scale. This is very important, especially where there has been a clarion call for the government to increase access to social insurance and social security to the informal sector that includes savings groups. How can savings groups be used as a conduit to increase access to women, to increase access of women to social insurance and social security to build resilience?
Yes. So I'll start by saying that the model itself actually offers a social capital for its members through the social funds or the emergency fund that the members contribute to. So by all these governments, by adopting them, they are creating that space that provides supportive mechanism to members through being there for each other, learning and networking, etc. So that's by adopting the model that happens. In actual implementation, some governments have been using the savings groups model as a graduation path. I think Thomas kind of touched a bit upon it, talking about delivery of cash and voucher transfers, etc. But when you look at the savings aspect of the graduation program, more and more governments are actually encouraging the beneficiaries of cash transfer to create groups themselves so that they can create their own capital and grow their own money. And we've seen that in Kenya, for example, or in Mali, Niger, and Chad. And I think that regarding social security and pensions and all of that, it's an area where we need to look into more. But we have very good examples, for example, in Rwanda, where under the National Social Support Program, the government has included pension schemes through savings groups to really deepen health insurance for all Rwandans, and also ensure that, and it's really an important piece because it's looking not only at people who are employed, but also self workers and private sector people who work for the private sector. So I think that those are beginnings of ways that governments are using the model, and that we should really dig into and understand the working, the impacts, and how it can be replicated.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a situation where savings groups will not save for only their consumption, but they will save for more for productive ventures that will enable them contribute to their future pensions and future shocks into, gradually into social security schemes, in the various countries. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much. And we move on. And our fourth speaker is Carissa Kudowo, who works with Bank of Ghana. And she is the deputy head of the Payment Systems Department. She is a trained supervisor regulator in banking operations and payment systems. She is a passionate advocate for financial inclusion, more specifically gender, financial inclusion, and other vulnerable groups. She has participated in several platforms for both locally and international platform in this regard. Thank you very much for joining us, Carissa. And we want you to share with us on the question, what is the result of the advocacy work that has been done so far on VSLA, and
that the WCF couldn't have chosen a better theme, because really
great.
SGS are a great channel for economic empowerment in the communities within which they operate, especially in communities where financial service providers are almost absent in any form. And the infrastructure that is needed to extend that service is also literally absent. The SGS are largely organized and guided by their own bylaws and constitutions, as we all know, and they do play a critical role in the provision of financial services to their members in very deprived communities, thereby creating an opportunity to increase formal financial inclusion through sustainable linkage programs. Regarding SGS impact on the community, it's more of an effect on the individual. Please keep it there, the slide there, thank you. It's more of an impact on the individual, and then this is what extends the group, which eventually impacts the community at large within which they operate. For instance, you may have an SG that has invested in a community center within the community, and they hire chairs, they acquire chairs which they hire to members for social events. Members can take loans to scale up their business, as well as members taking loans to educate their kids. The exclusion of such important economic grouping, therefore, from the formal economy represents some of a loss to GDP. The advent of C19, that's COVID-19, has even made the strongest case for ensuring their total inclusion as much as possible. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind as it comes to hurt us all in the long run. Their continued exclusion makes them more vulnerable, but it's important that we recognize savings groups as a core component of the financial system and implement policies and measures that enhance their sustainability. COVID-19 brought to the fore the need to improve accessibility and availability of the relevant information that will enable such vulnerable groups to benefit from government social protection schemes and other interventions to enable them recover in times of pandemic. Their very existence is a manifestation of a need, and if properly set up, managed, and harnessed into the formal economy, their respective local economies would improve as the groups become more sustainable. How has government, next slide please. How has government, next slide please. How has government, as part of the national strategy put together, how do governments see SGs as part of the national strategy being put together? And what are the plans for the future? In Ghana, there are 5 reinforcing pillars underlying our national financial inclusion development strategy to increase our financial inclusion rate from 58% to 85% by 2023. The pillars, as you can see on the slide, are 1, financial stability, access, quality, usage of financial services, financial infrastructure, which aims, for instance, to support innovation and the efficient delivery of financial services, and to increase information to borrowers and micro, small, and medium enterprises. Financial consumer protection, which aims to instill confidence in financial products and services to increase accountability. With the last one being financial capability, which aims also to increase capability, awareness, and the use of financial products and services by increasing a customer's understanding of the financial products and the ability to manage their personal finances. Our focus on pillar 2, which is access, still on there. Our focus, thank you very much. Our focus on pillar 2, which is access, quality, and usage of financial services, which objective is to increase availability and usage of innovative financial products and services tailored to the needs of the financially excluded population through 1, increasing proximity of the financial access points, expanding digital financial services, and then promoting diverse and low-cost products and services for such customers. It is for this reason that under the country's financial sector development projects, which is being implemented by the Ministry of Finance, government seeks to provide a linkage program for these SGs to accelerate our national financial inclusion agenda. Under this project, government is targeting the most deprived areas in the country. Currently, 5 regions are being looked at, and this the government intends to achieve through a developed policy or regulatory framework for the VSLA linkage, a well-functioning VSL linkage infrastructure, and then an enhanced group sustainability. The other key holders driving this agenda includes the central bank, the association and apex bodies of financial service providers and payment service providers, other industry stakeholders, and our country's development partners. The linkage will invariably lift the poor and vulnerable within these communities from obscurity to visibility. What is visible gets measured. Measuring provides inputs for the necessary policy interventions to stimulate growth, for sustainable growth and development when necessary, and thus equip communities with the requisite functional skills and tools for economic empowerment. Without data or information on such communities, it would be very difficult to provide the necessary policy interventions. Even though this is a government agenda, it hasn't yet started. But that does not mean that nothing is being done in the VSLA ecosystem in Ghana. I think Aisha has mentioned, Leke mentioned something that was happening in Ghana, the cocoa industry. Already, we will have some financial service providers such as Fidelity Bank and APSA, as well as some rural banks in collaboration with NGOs like Care International, World Vision, and Plan International, having linked some of these VSLAs or savings groups to the financial system. As a regulator, the Bank of Ghana regulates the financial services industry. It's a key stakeholder for this project. We're also dedicated to improving the lives of these communities through virtually all of the 5 years as in the previous slide. This we do by creating the needed enabling legal and regulatory environment for assessing and using these financial products and services. Sometimes for public good, we may invest in the underlying infrastructure to enable the financial service providers to leverage and then be able to extend these services to such communities. Service providers are extending their reach through agency banking, relationships, financial literacy awareness programs to stimulate demand for financial services. With available data, providers can leverage on what to do to improve access to finance and even develop gender-responsive policies when we're able to collect and analyze such data. The Bank of Ghana is mandated under Act 930 to develop appropriate consumer protection measures to ensure that the interests of customers, including those linked SGs of these service providers, are adequately protected. Therefore, the Bank of Ghana carries conduct supervision of these service providers under its jurisdiction with the aim of one, promoting a fair and transparent market, promoting a level playing field for all participants, especially customers, by ensuring clear rules of engagement, and then preventing, deterring, detecting abuses by these service providers. To date, we have issued 2 such directives and that conduct supervision to all market participants, including consumers of financial services and products. The others being drafted. These two directives further on disclosure and transparency, as well as consumer recourse mechanisms for redress of customer complaints, harm, or loss. We are currently working on similar directives for the digital financial service space, as COVID-19 has seen accelerated growth in the use of digital financial services across the country. I'll pause at this place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carissa. This is an eye-opener. As a Ghanaian, I don't really know that we even have this policy. So it's an eye-opener for me. Thank you very much for sharing. My question is that, this policy is very good and highlights the digital financial services, such as mobile money to target rural residents, including women and the poor. But the fact is that most of these people do not own mobile phones. They do not own mobile phones. So what do you think should be done to ensure that the very people that the policy aims at targeting are not excluded?
Thank you very much. In 2009, the Bank of Ghana, through a subsidiary company, GIBS, introduced the eSwitch platform.
Yeah.
Yes, the eSwitch.
Yes.
The e-switch has a number of unique features that make it the most appropriate for extending branchless banking services to people like that. For instance, there's no need for the holder or the bearer of the e-switch card to own a bank account or have a phone. The e-switch card can be used on any POS. It's not tied to any particular bank. The card costs less than 20 cedis, that's roughly less than $4, and is often given out for free by some financial institutions and some social intervention programs too. Access to the e-switch services has been extended beyond bank branches. In localities where segments of the population are unable to access banks, we have the mobile money agents and cooperative unions who are now offering the e-switch services. Thus, the bank customers who do not own phones but have e-switch cards can access services from the agent's locations. The e-switch system is now also integrated into the mobile money platform, as has been the case with the traditional banking system. And so you can still have transact on the mobile money platform when you have the e-switch card. E-switch card holders can send and receive funds from a mobile money wallet or a bank account. It has been integrated. Literacy has been identified as a major barrier to financial inclusion. Hence, most people have tended to rely on third parties to perform transactions, thereby exposing them to fraud through social engineering. The e-switch card overcomes this challenge because it's biometric to authenticate transactions. And so you don't need to tell somebody that, please get my card and use the PIN so that you can do a transaction for me. It's purely by your biometrics. Telecommunications coverage is another challenge extending financial services. As you know, most of these outlandish areas may not have the connectivity, and so mobile money transaction can even be a challenge. Fortunately, the e-switch system is designed in such a way to overcome this challenge. Most basic e-switch transactions, that is cash deposit and cash withdrawals, are processed offline. This means that these transactions are performed without network connections. The operator settles transactions at the end of the day at a location where the network is better. And finally, e-switch transactions are lower than most cost of mobile money transactions in terms of the fees. Thank you. So I think e-switch looks like a better alternative where if you don't have a mobile phone or a device. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Yes, I know e-switch card. That is what Ghana is using to pay our cash transfers, and it's a very effective way of reaching to the extreme poor and people in rural areas. Thank you very much, Carissa, for sharing this with us. We move to our last presentation, which is going to be given by Alan Degree. Alan works with the National Agency for the Promotion of Financial Inclusion in Côte d'Ivoire. He is the financial inclusion specialist with the agency for promotion of financial inclusion, and he is in charge of development and relations with partners. And Alan is going to also deal with the topic, just as Carissa did, on how governments have factored into their strategies, VSLAs or savings groups and other matters. So over to you, Alan.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to do this presentation. So in this presentation, I'll be able to present a little bit what was done in Côte d'Ivoire as far as the national strategy of financial inclusion from 2019 to 2024. So my presentation will be done in two parts, with an introduction, point one, and then the second one will be the vision of this strategy of financial inclusion, where I will mention the main points and a different strategic axis. And then I will finish with the initiatives that we will take on.
Next, l'introduction. Aïcha, s'il te plaît. OK.
Tu n'arrives pas à le voir?
Non, non, c'est juste l'introduction. Sinon, je vois. C'est pour les autres.
Okay.
Je suis au niveau de l'introduction.
Okay.
Alors, pour gagner en temps,
to save some time, this national strategy of inclusion, financial inclusion strategy was developed
gérer les défis, le défi qui était là
to manage challenges to access to services, formal services. In this context, this national financial inclusion strategy was developed.
Cette stratégie était élaborée
The strategy was developed through a participative process with the public sector actors and private sector partners. As I said before, this strategy was developed around a vision and a principles objective together. The vision for this strategy, national financial inclusion strategy, is meant to promote the greatest access to products and services, so for small and medium enterprises, young people, women. So this is intended to be done through partnerships with financial institutions and using digital finance, which would allow us to reach our goals. So the principal objective of this strategy was to improve the level of financial inclusion from to 77% from 60%. And this strategy of financial inclusion has 5 different axes or focuses for vulnerable and excluded populations, also to promote access to digital finance digitally, and financial education, increase financial education, to have an evolving and better supervision, and to develop a tax system for inclusion, better and more inclusive tax strategy. So these are the different axes that the VSLA, the first axis was access to financial services. In that regard, we have to improve the access to financing and credit by women, but we also have to allow better deployment of financial services in rural areas in order to especially allow women and young and youth and vulnerable populations in rural areas to carry out financial transactions. The second axis, important focus, was the VSLAs and protecting the clients and the financial transactions. So we wanted to have a national program of financial education to develop financial education, financial capabilities, competencies in different target groups And through this process, we wanted also to encourage the actors in the informal sector. We wanted to help them digitize their activities. So the third point in terms of different initiatives that were carried out and which are still ongoing, and future activities, we had two main activities that we organized. We led a pilot program in two specific regions in Côte d'Ivoire, in the cities of Soubri and Mbato. These pilot programs targeted VSLA members and with their financial needs. And we also used a series of questions on a questionnaire in the field, so we could learn what the main players in the VSLAs and in the areas where cooperatives were operating. We wanted to know what financial institutions were not too far from those areas. So we also used information to develop a business case model to develop products and services adapted to the VSLAs. And for the FAR projects that are yet to come, we are focusing on access to products and financial products and services used by women who have small and micro enterprises, businesses. So it's a very important project for us. And based on this project, we'll be able to gain or learn a great amount of information, which will help us learn more about the stakeholders, both in the public and private sector, who could work with the VSLAs or who do work with the VSLAs. This is what I wanted to share with you about the National Financial Inclusion Strategy of Côte d'Ivoire for VSLAs. Thank you so much. I thank you very much. The interpreter is not hearing. Sorry, the interpreter is not hearing.
I think you're on mute, Rita.
Okay.
Hi, Rita, you're on mute currently.
Hello, is that okay?
Yes.
Great. So my question for you, Alan, thank you very much for that presentation. My question is that researchers have cautioned the short-term impact of VSLAs or savings groups on households' financial well-being and advocated that they cannot be made a top anti-poverty investment. What is your view of this, on this one?
Pour répondre à cette question, je pense que
to answer this question, I think that financial needs are an instrument to fight poverty. Our objective is to bring the members of the VSLAs towards the official, formal financial institutions and systems. So this is a kind of a national education, financial education system in order to help us strengthen competencies among the different members of the VSLAs, Village Savings and Loan Associations. It is true that the VSLAs during a certain time period won't be able to fight poverty, but to starting with the VSLAs, it's a good point of departure towards the formal use of the existing financial systems. And I think will help us to move to another higher scale. And the members of these VSLAs will be able to help us plan or learn how to use different financial products and services to boost different activities on the ground, in the field. Thank you very much.
I think you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
So there are no questions received from participants. And so okay. I will try to ask some questions. And I have one for Thomas. Thomas, how can the findings of your report be used to respond to future large economic and health shocks?
Thanks very much, Rita. That's a really good question. So before we conducted our study on women's groups in COVID-19, we also conducted a study on how village savings and loan associations, as well as other types of women's groups, both with a focus on financial inclusion, as well as other areas such as health, how they have responded to past economic shocks and system-wide, like nationwide economic shocks. What we have seen is that actually many of the things I previously presented were in village savings and loan associations, as well as other kinds of groups, have had similar effects during the Ebola crisis, for example, in the past, where groups were also protective of negative economic consequences in those settings as well. So clearly we cannot extrapolate necessarily to all economic shocks. What we do see is that the kind of mechanisms that enable VSLAs to have positive effects on household resilience are not exclusive to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's quite clear that they also have this opportunity in other crises as well, and the evidence is quite consistent. I think one thing though to keep in mind here is I'm speaking primarily about individual resilience here. So members themselves are benefiting from the groups, but this sometimes comes at the expense of group resources. So I think one key concern here is that during crisis, and we have also seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that while members benefit, at some point there comes a point where groups are themselves facing difficulties with their sustainability, where they may not have sufficient resources to continue. And the longer the crisis takes, the more they have to deplete their resources. So I think this is one key concern. And in those kinds of cases, groups may need additional support to continue existing but individuals during future crises, and it could hold, for example, for price drops in coffee prices or in cacao prices, like members could benefit from these kinds of mechanisms. So I see that the moderator dropped, so I don't know whether we are going to get more questions or whether we have to start moderating ourselves.
Ok, je peux ajouter d'autres éléments à
Other elements, I'd like to add more elements to what was said already. So as far as different actions that should touch upon what we need to initiate, like Aisha already mentioned, even the maps that should be carried out. And I think that this study or research, this mapping will allow us to have more visibility, because we're going to need actions to formalize and carry out actions that will allow these entities to develop and have better financial systems. So that is really the main point I wanted to pinpoint while we wait for the moderator to come back and join us. Thank you.
Clarissa?
Clarissa?
I'm thinking while we wait for
Rita?
yes, like in terms of recovery and around COVID, also linked to what we've heard earlier, how do you see the role of savings groups there as a central bank? Do you see them stepping up, and what kind of, what do you think as a bank to support that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry about that. My line just went off. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Yes, Thomas? Thomas, please, are you there?
Yes, I did. We continued while you were off, Rita. So I answered the question. So if you have any other questions, maybe it's best to go to the other panelists.
Okay, great. So Aisha, I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on one of your slides, since we have more time, where what is being done in Uganda by the government. You said Uganda is taking a holistic approach to integrating SDGs for women empowerment. And if you can throw more light on that. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So I think that what we've seen a bit in the government of Uganda was that there were so many initiatives happening where savings groups were being included, but at the same time, we felt that it was not coordinated and the impact was not being seen the way it should be seen, right? And what they've started doing, and they got funding to be able to do that, was to work on their regulations. Their central bank put in place a microfinance act that was regulating the way saving groups will be implemented in countries. And at the same time, they ensured that those ministries like social protection, like rural development, who are implementing savings groups model, actually communicate so that, for example, they don't work in the same regions, that they are not targeting per se the same groups, or they are targeting some of the same groups when it comes to different interventions, whether it's around agricultural purposes or access to health, etc. And we feel that the fact that they are actually now speaking to each other and that they are working and knowing what are the policies in place has been really important. And as I mentioned, one of the pieces that is key is once the policies are in place, how do we do it on the ground? So engaging with the local level, with the sub-regional level actors around creating groups has been really important. And it goes beyond creating groups. And as I mentioned, they engaged with different partners, whether it's private sector or NGOs and others to do that, especially around capacity building and supporting some of the resourcing. I can share the case study for that if it's of interest. for some of you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can share that with us later. I wanted Like to also share with us some of the challenges in missing the two set of, especially the groups, the two set of members of the groups. One belonging to cocoa, maybe they have cocoa farmers, and other groups, non-cocoa farmers. How are they? Is there any challenges in mixing this group of people together in a saving group? Thank you.
Thanks. I don't think we see many challenges in practice when it comes to that. The members of our groups are often, they are cocoa farmers or the wives of cocoa farmers. So maybe they are not cocoa farmers themselves, but linked to them in a way. And I have not heard of any stories of that being a difficult mix somehow. I think the most important thing is that people are able to choose who becomes a member of the group, whether they are cocoa farmers or not, so that they're comfortable sharing that money and being in that group together.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, on Carissa, could you also please share with us, you mentioned the e-switch card, and you elaborated a lot about how it's been, how it's working in reaching the rural foods. Is there any challenges that we can learn from in using that as a tool?
In the beginning, the uptake was very slow, primarily because it wasn't really being pushed by the financial service providers. They seem to have seen it as a competitor product because it was being pushed from the regulators' end. And so
could you please use about 30 seconds? Could you please use our 30 seconds for this, please? Thank you.
Oh God, I didn't hear you. Could I use what?
About 30 seconds to answer this question, please.
Okay. And the challenge was that initially it wasn't really patronized because the bank that was supposed to have pushed it thought it was a competitive product. And so they'd rather push their products than push the e-switch. And then you had a card, you went to the merchants, the devices were not, the POSs were not on display for you to use. So the uptake was very, very slow. But with the mobile money, it was easy for people to adopt. If we are looking at this group, it looks as if e-switch should be the most suitable product for them, especially the STs. So if they don't have phones, if they don't have phones, it's most appropriate.
Thank you very much. Any final comments from you, Alan? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So a lot has been discussed and shared today in respect of VSLA. We have seen how VSLAs have provided members a secure place to save, the opportunity to borrow in small amounts on flexible terms, and how they have assisted in building members' economic and business capacities, as well as self-confidence and social power, both at household and community levels. It has been an interesting discussion full of fascinating insights into VSLAs, support in dealing with social issues to overcome challenges beyond direct supply chain, for instance, to fight child labor in the cocoa communities, as well as serving as a coping mechanisms during cocoa market disruptions and global pandemic. It is very promising to know that the governments of the two leading producers of cocoa have recognized the critical role of savings groups and have factored it into their financial inclusion strategies. We have indicated here that the need to pay close attention to the economic and social challenges facing savings groups, such as limited resources which threaten their sustainability and effectiveness. What is not clear is that government has not factored savings groups in social protection interventions, as you want to see, such as cash transfers, vouchers, and/or food transfers through a dedicated public funding in order to preserve the viability of savings groups. Governments are therefore being urged to integrate savings groups into social protection programs, especially in emergency situations. And companies are also being urged to increase their support in establishing and sustaining savings groups in their operational areas. This will not only help the farmers, but also support communities to deal with social problems such as child labor and gender inequalities. On this note, we want to thank everybody for participating in these discussions. We want to thank our panelists, all of you. God bless you for sharing. We want to also thank the organizers for putting this together. And on this note, thank you very much. God bless.